إخواني وأخواتي الحضور، أعضاء الجمعية الاقتصادية الكرام، حياكم الله اليوم في واحدة من أمسيات الجمعية الاقتصادية اللي راح تشهد توقيع اتفاقية في البداية مع الكونفرنس بورد الخليج، مركز كونفرنس بورد الخليج للأبحاث. هو هو فرع مركز تابع لمركز ذا كونفرنس بورد اللي في مقره في الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية. طبعا تأسس الكونفرنس بورد من قبل سنة تقريبا في الكويت، وبالتعاون مع اتحاد المصارف ومؤسسة التقدم كويت التقدم العلمي، واللي اليوم احنا في الجمعية الاقتصادية أيضا راح يكون لنا دور في هذا التعاون إن شاء الله مع الإخوان لأهمية ودعم الأبحاث اللي تختص في الاقتصاد الكويتي، وخصوصا هم متخصصين في إعطاء مؤشرات عن المؤشرات الاقتصادية المهمة في سواء كان الكويت أو في الخليج. في البداية أحب دكتور إذا تحب أول شيء نوقع وبعدين تبتي تعطي انترودكشن. فنوقع إن شاء الله اتفاقية.
صورة جديدة.
إذا ناخذ صورة ويا الإخوان الأعضاء مجلس إدارة، أبو عبد العزيز يلا توفيق.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. نقدم بالشكر الكثير لأخونا الأخ مهند الصانع رئيس الجمعية الاقتصادية على استضافتنا الليلة في الجمعية الاقتصادية في مقرها الجديد وفي حلتها الجديدة. مبارك لكم أول شيء الموقع، ما شاء الله خوش مكان. وأيضا نرحب في كل الأخوان الحضور الليلة. الهدف أنا بتكلم 5 دقائق يمكن، مو أكثر مو كثير. المحاضرة الرئيسية راح يقدمها الأستاذ البروفيسور بارت فان آرك. أنا ودي بس أتكلم كلمتين عن المركز، مركز ذا كونفرنس بورد الخليج في الكويت. المركز هذا طبعا اسمه مركز، حتى سميناه نفس الإنجليزي، مركز ذا كونفرنس بورد الخليج للبحوث الاقتصادية والتجارية. المركز هذا طبعا يعني الجهود، خل أتكلم أول شيء يعني من أكثر من تقريبا 6 سنوات الأخ هشام الرزوقي المدير الأسبق للGIC اللي هو مؤسسة الخليج للاستثمار، يعني كانت فكرته، أبو عبد الرزاق أعتقد غني عن التعريف، وبذل صراحة جهود كبيرة في إقناع الجهات المختلفة بالكويت بأهمية وجود مركز مثل هذا بالكويت، وليس لخدمة الكويت فقط وإنما لخدمة المنطقة كلها، دول الخليج بأكملها يعني. فالشكر الكبير لي أيضا أخونا هشام رزوقي على المسعى هذا، مبارك له في تولد أو مولود المركز الجديد هذا بالكويت. الداعمين الرئيسيين للمركز مؤسسة الكويت للتقدم العلمي، الدكتور عدنان شهاب الدين، مشكور أبو أحمد على المساهمة الكبيرة من كيفاس لتأسيس المركز، وأيضا الأخوان في اتحاد المصارف، اتحاد مصارف الكويت كان لهم أيضا مساهمة في تأسيس المركز هذا، وتقدموا مشكورين بدعم مالي لتأسيس المركز في فترة الحضانة التي ستستمر لمدة 3 سنوات، وبعد ذلك يكون المركز سيلف فاينانس أو يدعم نفسه بنفسه عن طريق الاشتراكات والخدمات اللي راح يقدمها سواء في الكويت أو في بقية دول مجلس التعاون. طبعا بالكويت احنا كان لنا قبل تقريبا سنة لانش في غرفة التجارة، صار تعريف للمركز، ولكن الآن من بعد مضي تقريبا سنة الآن بدأت الثمار تبدأ تبين، وراح يقدم لنا الدكتور بارت الليلة محاضرات في 3 مخرجات أو 3 ثمار بوادر الأبحاث والدراسات اللي أنجزها المركز خلال العام الماضي. للمزيد من التعريف عن المركز، طبعا المركز it's non-profit يعني غير هادف للربحية، member driven يعني راح يكون يعني مصدر التمويل ماله راح عن طريق الاشتراكات والأعضاء. It's a think tank and research organization أسس في نوفمبر 2018 حسب قانون الاستثمار المباشر الأجنبي في دولة الكويت، كون أن المركز هذا تابع لمركز The Conference Board في أمريكا. مثل ما قلت الدعم بالتأسيس جاي من مؤسسة الكويت للتقدم العلمي وأيضا اتحاد مصارف الكويت. المركز في الكونفرنس بورد في أمريكا هو منظمة نون بروفيت أيضا ونون بارتيجن، بمعنى ليس له أجندة سياسية أو تابع حزب أو سياسي، وإنما مركز مستقل، وتم تأسيسه في عام 1906 يعني الآن صار عمره تقريبا 103 سنوات. 1916 عفوا، فصار له 103 سنوات عمره الآن. في بعضويته الآن تقريبا حوالي 1200 جهة خاصة وجهة حكومية تشمل كبرى شركات، في أكثر من 15 شركة من الفورتشن 500 أعضاء في الكونفرنس بورد. في عام 2015 قبل حوالي 3 سنوات وشوي صار في ميرجر بين الإيكونوميك ديفلوبمنت كونسل أو كوميتي فور ايكونوميك ديفلوبمنت في واشنطن دي سي مع مركز ذا كونفرنس بورد، وهذا أعطاه بعد آخر، كون أن الكوميتي فور ايكونوميك ديفلوبمنت من اللجان الهامة في العاصمة الأمريكية، وعلى سبيل المثال البريتن وود انستتيوشنز والمارشال بلان، وهل تسمعون عنه اليوم البنك وورلد بانك IMF، هذه كلها كانت مبادرات من الايكونوميك ديفلوبمنت كوميتي او الكوميتي فور ايكونوميك ديفلوبمنت في واشنطن. فهذه خلفيه سريعه. الكونفرنس بورد في له مكتب الرئيسي في نيويورك، له مكتب في بروسلز في بلجيكا وبيجين في الصين، وعنده مكاتب اصغر شوي في مومباي وهونغ كونغ وسنغافوره وكندا، والان طبعا الكويت يخدم الخليج، منطقه الخليج. المجلس الاستشاري للكونفرنس بورد يترأسه الأخ هشام الرزوقي، وأعضاء الدكتور عدنان شهاب الدين من كيفاس، وعادل الماجد بصفة رئيس مجلس إدارة اتحاد البنوك أو اتحاد المصارف الكويت، وأيضا هو CEO حق بوبيان بانك. في عندنا جان سبكتر، هو كان CEO مال الكونفرنس بورد سابقا، تقاعد الآن ولكن موجود ويانا بالبورد. عندنا الأخ عبد الرحمن الزامل من المملكة العربية السعودية من الزامل جروب، عضو في المجلس الاستشاري، والدكتور خالد مهدي طبعا تعرفونه الأمين العام للمجلس الأعلى للتخطيط عندنا، وآخرا وليس أخيرا السيد ماجد العجيل من بنك برقان، وكان أيضا هو الرئيس السابق لمؤسسة لاتحاد مصارف الكويت. فهذه الادفايزري بورد هو اسمه ادفايزري، بس في حقيقه الامر اتس مور ذان ادفايزري، كانه الفول بورد حق المركز ويوجه المركز، ونستفيد من خبرات الاخوان الموجودين في المركز هذا. Objectives of the Gulf Center، انا ما ابي اخذ وقت كثير، الخص السلايد هذا يمكن في السلايد هذا اللي هو يتكلم عن 3 نقاط رئيسيه: القيام بالدراسات وابحاث الايكونوميك اند بزنس مانجمنت ريسيرش، هذا هدف، ويقوم بما يسمى مجالس النظراء او نسميه بالانجليزي الكونسلز. الكونسلز هذه يكون مجموعه من المسؤولين في الشركات من اللي لهم مثلا CFOs أو CEOs أو CIOs في different councils، والآن تقريبا موجود 125 كونسل على مستوى العالم للكونفرنس بورد، وهذول يجتمعون مرتين أحيانا 3 مرات سنوات، والكونسلز هذه تستمر أحيانا 5 سنوات 6 سنوات. هي مجموعة عمل جروبس. الكونفرنس بورد هو الحلو أنه يجيب المجاميع هذه من different sectors من different industries ويحطهم مع بعض ويناقشون التشالنجز اللي أمامهم، وأيضا يدعمهم بالأبحاث اللي عنده إياها. الشغلة الثالثة اللي يسويها الكونفرنس بورد عندنا الايكونوميك انديكيتورز. هذا يعطيك ايكونوميك داشبورد حق المخطط الاقتصادي وأيضا حق البزنس ليدرز شلون يديرون قراراتهم الاستثمارية، سواء استثمار، هايرنج، انفنتوري، كذا، على هالمؤشرات الاقتصادية هذه اللي تبين خلال المرحلة القادمة شلون الوضع الاقتصادي، هل هو في انكماش، هل هو في نمو، هل هو استمر كما هو الحال. بناء عليه تاخذون القرارات بكونفيدنت، يعطيهم ثقة في فهذا يكمل الداشبورد. وهذا أيضا مهم حق المخطط الاقتصادي أو الجهات الاقتصادية في القطاع الحكومي أيضا، أن يشوفون الوضع الاقتصادي. فباختصار نقدر نقول المركز يعني الفاليو ادد فيها نولج 1، 2 نتوركينج أو انجيجمنت، يجمع المجاميع المختلفة سواء من الحكومة أو القطاع الخاص. هني 5 مجالات للأبحاث كما تم بالاتفاق مع الإخوان في كيفاس، أن هذه أولويات حددوها: Human Capital, Environmental and Social Corporate Governance. عفوا، هذول 5 مراكز موجودين في الكونفرنس بورد. راح أنا بعد شوي حق 5 مشاريع أبحاث تم الاتفاق مع الإخوان في كيفاس عليها. هذه على الكونسلز اللي أنا توني تكلمت عنها، وهذه بريفينجز إضافة إلى الكونسلز والبريفينجز. والبريفينجز هذه تكون بإمكان الممبر أنه يتصل في الكونفرنس بورد ويطلب توضيحات، يطلب explanation على بعض النتائج اللي قاعد يعلنها أو المؤشرات الاقتصادية. فمو بس يجيك تقرير تقرأ، وإنما أيضا إذا تبي أيضا كممبر تقدر تتصل ويقول لك التقرير هذا أو المؤشرات هذه صاعدة نازلة، شو اللي وراها، شو القصة، يعطيك إنسايت ويعطيك عمق في الأشياء هذه. من الجهات المستفيدة National Development Planning Organizations، الجهات التخطيطية بالجهات الحكومية، National Statistical Bureaus، راح نقعد احنا على قاعدة ضخمة من البيانات. في السنترال بانكس أكيد راح يهمهم، State Owned Companies، شركات المملكة الحكومة، وأيضا شركات القطاع الخاص، وأيضا المالتي ناشونال اللي لهم اهتمام في منطقة الخليج. هذه ال5 مشاريع اللي تم تحديدها أو وضعت على سلم الأولويات بالنسبة حق منطقة الخليج. البرودكتيفيتي درايفرز، شنو العوامل اللي قاعدة تساعد على أو ما تساعد على إنتاجية اقتصادات دول الخليج. جلف سي سويت تشالنج، هذا يتكلم عن الCEOs وما في حكمهم السيت سويت وش نظرتهم للاقتصاد. النقطة الثالثة تتكلم عن الهيومن كابيتال والقوى العاملة في دول الخليج. والمحور الرابع هو موضوع الانوفيشن. والمحور الخامس هو ترانزيشن إلى النولج ايكونوميز أو لدول الخليج. بالنسبة حق الانديكيتورز، في الليدنج ايكونوميك انديكيتور، هذا اليوم يسعدنا أن يعني نطلع أول نسخة من الانديكيتور هذا، راح يتكلم عنه الدكتور بارت بعد شوي. وجلف ايكونوميك اوتلوك، انتم تشوفون من IMF ومن الورلد بانك ومن جهات مختلفه يعطون الايكونوميك اوتلوك على مستوى العالم، ولكن ما في شيء على مستوى الخليج بالتفصيل. فهذا ايضا اول تقرير مفصل على الايكونوميك اوتلوك حق دول مجلس التعاون، ايضا راح يعرضه الدكتور بارت. جلف كونسيومر كونفيدنس اندكس، هذا ايضا مؤشر مبني على فيلد وورك ومهم وايد، وخاصة حق الريتيلرز، حق المانيفاكتشررز، يهمهم ثقة المستهلك في المرحلة القادمة وعزمه على الإنفاق أو من عدمه. Gulf Competitiveness and Innovation Index، هذا للحين ما صار بس سيتم إن شاء الله خلال السنة ونصف القادمة. وأخيراً الجلف Economic and Business Insight، هذا راح يكون أيضاً periodically يطلع quarterly، يعطي يبين الوضع الاقتصادي في دول مجلس التعاون. مع هذه مقدمة بس على الكونفرنس بورد. Now I would like to switch to English. I would like to introduce Professor Bart Van Ark. He's from Holland, but he's stationed in the headquarters of the conference board in New York. He's been with the conference board for about 10 years, and he's the chief economist and the executive vice president of the conference board. Dr. Bart, it's a pleasure to have you here, and would like to welcome you to the podium to give us a brief about your talk.
Thank you very much. While the presentation is being put on the screen, I'd like to, first of all, thank the Kuwait Economic Society for your very kind hosting of this event tonight. So congratulations, and thank you for joining us tonight. I have a huge challenge ahead of me tonight. First of all, we have a lot of things to talk about: the global economic outlook, the Gulf economic outlook, and our new productivity report. Secondly, I have no slides. And so I want to start with the global economy. And I know that you had a presentation here last week about the global economy, very optimistic that things will actually look okay. And as a matter of fact, at the conference board, when we released our global economic outlook last month, we were also of the opinion that at least in the short term, the global economy will actually look reasonably good. There is, of course, a lot of concern. There's a lot of uncertainty. A lot of that is related to a lot of geo-economic and political events. For example, the trade dispute between the United States and China. There's concern about the issues around Brexit. There is tension in lots of parts of the world, including in the Middle East. So there are some good reasons to be concerned. And also when we look at some of the economic indicators, for example, when we look at the very rapid decline in industrial production that has been taking place across the global economy, there are some reasons to be concerned. Our purchasing managers indexes, or indexes of forward-looking indexes on industrial production, still are mostly in negative territory. However, we have a few reasons to believe that the global economy is actually going to look significantly better in 2020. One of the reasons is that around the world, and maybe we're actually going to get the slides up in a second, which would be fantastic. Yes, thank you very much, great. Some of the reasons why we're actually thinking that things may be looking more positive is, first of all, that labor markets, which is the second bullet point here, as well as consumer performance across the global economy is still doing very well. Now, those of you who are economists will say, well, yes, but labor markets and consumers, that are usually not a leading economic indicator. They are usually a lagging economic indicator. They follow the bad news. That is true. To a large extent. However, we do believe that the labor markets and consumption is unusually strong. Unemployment in the United States is around 3%. In Europe, it is higher, but still for European terms quite low at about 7%. In Asia, employment growth is still very solid. With low inflation, the purchasing power of consumers is relatively strong, and as a result, it really looks that consumption and labor markets can pull us along. The second important point is that the decline in industrial production that I was mentioning a little earlier is actually beginning to show some early signs of easing. Those of you who have followed the news, today's numbers on China, where a lot of the decline in industrial production in 2019 and 18 has taken place, is actually beginning to ease a little, even bottom out a little. And we believe that around the world, as China is gradually going to recover a little bit, this will spread across the global economy into Europe, into the United States, into other emerging markets such as the Gulf region, and we'll see a little bit of recovery happening in 2019. Of course, there are downsides. The uncertainties around geopolitical uncertainties could go wrong. If, for example, there will be no trade deal. If that would happen, that there's no trade deal between the United States and China, consumer confidence can be more seriously hit, and that could really lead to major concerns. But really, what we think is that even though 2020 may look better, our main concerns are actually about the medium term or the longer term. And a lot of that has to do with the slowing growth of labor supply and the weakness of productivity growth, which I will talk about in particular tonight. So even though our short-term outlook is relatively positive, it's our medium-term outlook, our outlook for labor growth and productivity that is relatively weak. And on top of that, even if we have a trade agreement between the United States and China, we're probably entering a much more difficult phase of globalization than what we have been seeing in the previous 2 decades. It's not just the United States, it's also the UK, it's also European countries who are rethinking the way that they are engaging in the global economy, and that may lead to a much more difficult medium-term growth. So in summary, short-term it looks pretty okay, medium-term is going to look significantly weaker. As I said, I cannot show you all the slides, I just wanted to show you a few things. One thing I want to show you from a conference board indicator, as Dr. Al-Jassef has already mentioned, is our consumer confidence indicator. We actually measure consumer confidence in 64 economies around the world. 2 of those economies are actually in the Gulf region, Saudi Arabia and the United Emirates, and one of our plans is to expand this index to the other 4 GCC economies. But what you can see on this heat map is where the most optimistic consumers are currently being found. They're in North America, and they're in large parts of Asia. They're also in the Middle East. As you can see, both the UAE and Saudi Arabia have more optimistic consumers than pessimistic consumers. Even in Germany, which is a country under quite a bit of pressure from the decline in industrial production, we still are seeing fairly optimistic consumers. So this is really important indication that indeed the global consumer performance is still relatively strong, and we believe that is a very important reason for a little bit more optimism for 2020. In this chart you see our outlook for 2020. The blue bars here is the growth rate that we are projecting for each of those individual regions. The red dash is the 2019 performance. So you can see that the mature economies at the top are actually still going to continue to weaken. Not recession, again, in 2020, but significantly slower growth, particularly in countries like the UK. Whatever happens to Brexit, the UK will significantly slow, in Japan, but also in the United States and in European countries. In emerging markets, we will mostly see an improvement. And that has to do with that easing and bottoming out of industrial production. The fact that industrial production will come back to growth, particularly emerging economies are most dependent on industry, and therefore that will matter really most for them in going forward. Overall, the global economy will grow at about 2.5% in 2020, a little bit more than 2019, but not recession territory. A global recession is more like anything less than 2% growth, and it is not likely, in our view, that we will be hitting that performance. Let's move to the Gulf now and see what are the implications of that for the Gulf economic outlook. And as I said, tomorrow you will receive our Gulf economic outlook. Also in the Gulf, we believe that growth will gradually slightly improve in 2020 to about 1.8%, up from 1.4% in 2019. That is the good news. The bad news is that that growth rate is well below the long-term growth rate of the Gulf region, which is in the past 5 years more in the region of 3.5%. So we're still growing in the current year and the next year at about half of the growth rate of our economies in the region in previous years. So we still have a lot of recovery to do. Also, any improvement in the region is really going to depend on these global trends that I was describing earlier. First of all, it really requires that the geopolitical uncertainties do not disproportionately impact on this region. So an ongoing decline in industrial production is obviously not good for the demand for oil, and if the demand for oil is down, that will impact the region. Geopolitical tension impacting on the region will obviously have its negative impacts on this part of the world. Oil prices need to remain at least above the around 60 to 70 US dollar range. If it drops very far below that, it is not going to be helpful for the region. And then again, consumer spending power, which, as I mentioned earlier, is strong in the region, needs to continue to stay strong in order to achieve those growth rates. What is very important here is that the country estimates are very sensitive to the performance of the oil sector of the economy, but also very important to the performance of the non-oil sector of the economy. And that is a lot of the productivity data that we were talking about a little bit earlier. We're slightly more optimistic about the growth performance of the region over the next decade or so. We think it can improve to 2.7%, which is significant. It's almost double the current performance. But for that, the economy will really have to see much better productivity performance, which is something that I will come back to just in a minute. I want to spend a little bit of time on this chart because it is very important from the productivity perspective. This is a chart that is looking at the growth performance in the Gulf region from the supply side. I could very briefly show you the previous slide. This is the growth performance from the demand side. So this is looking at the contribution of investment and consumption and exports. And that shows quite a few differences between countries. So for example, you can see in Kuwait, which is the second bar here, that the economy has been doing fine in terms of consumption growth, in terms of investment, in terms of public consumption. But it has not been doing good in terms of net exports, which is the blue bar on the downside, and that has detracted from the growth in the region. It's quite different in other regions. This is just for an average of the period 2013 to 18. But if you move from the demand side to the supply side, you get this chart. Of course, the GDP growth is the same, but the decomposition, the breakdown is different. And what you see in this chart is that the red parts of this bar is basically what we call the quantitative contributions to growth. This is the growth of investment, the growth of capital stock, of machinery and structures, and it is the growth of the labor force. The dark red part is the labor force growth. That's been positive in all the regions, in all the countries within the region. The green parts is what we call the qualitative factors of growth. So this is not the growth of investment, but it is the transition of investment to the more high return assets. Digital transformation, for example, and the move towards information and communication technology. The improvement in the skills of the workforce, and very important, that increase in productivity. And you can see that these green parts have mostly been on the downside. So what we've been seeing in the region, and it's with the exception of the UAE, we have seen pretty consistently that even if the quantitative sectors are good, so we are investing and we're growing jobs, the productivity growth, the increase in skills, the transition to digital transformation has been relatively weak and has slowed growth significantly down. So take the case of Kuwait. The average growth rate of the past 5 years, 2013 to 18, was 0.5%. If productivity growth had just been 0 instead of negative, the economy would have grown 6% instead of 0.5%. But it is simply because productivity growth declined by more than 5% that the economy is ending up at a growth rate of about 0.5%. So this is not a small thing. It's a huge thing that we see that we are making all these investments, we're adding people to the labor force, but we don't create the productivity growth, we don't add to the skills of the workforce, we don't make this transition to digital transformation and innovation and technological change, and as a result, the economy is being held back at only 0.5% growth. That is the challenge that we are looking at ahead of us in the longer term. And that's why, and I don't have time to go through these growth rates, that's why when you look at 2019 and 2020, the growth rates are, very modest. They are in the range of, 1 or 2% at best. Whereas at a minimum, we could do 3 or 4% if we just got this productivity story right. So the last part of my presentation, I'll show you one more thing and then I go to the last part of the presentation because Dr. Al-Jassaf was referring to very important indicators that we're using in order to understand these dynamics in the short term. This is our leading economic indicator for Kuwait. And you can see here the orange line is showing you the leading economic index that we're seeing for the region. And you can see that is still holding up reasonably well, although it has been declining over the last couple of months. But we are still sort of confident that at least the economy, as I showed you just in the previous chart, can go back to about a 2.3% growth rate in 2020, just on the basis of the short-term indicators that are still showing us some strength in going forward. But where I really want to spend the last sort of 10 minutes of my introduction and then open up for a few questions is to continue to talk about this topic of productivity. Because in the last year, we have done a lot of work on a report which is called Prioritizing Productivity in the Gulf Region. What is it that needs to be done in order to get that productivity growth rate, back on track? This is the report that we'll be publishing tomorrow, and again, if you leave your information there, if you have registered, you will receive a copy of this report in your email tomorrow or Wednesday at the very latest. It's not the first time we are touching on this topic. In fact, in 2008, the conference board, at that time sponsored by the Gulf Investment Corporation, did a study on the productivity area, calling Growing Beyond Oil. So this is more than 10 years ago, that some of the conclusions that we were drawing then are still relevant today. Too much emphasis, too much reliance on oil and gas, too much growth of jobs, but no growth of productivity, too much allocation of efforts to sectors like construction and real estate that are not the most productive sectors in the economy, too little emphasis on competitive sectors like manufacturing and financial services, although in some countries financial services have of course picked up in the past 10 years. Too much what we call imperfections in labor and capital markets that just are not very competitive and therefore not sending the right signals for the private sector to make the investments there where you can get the biggest productivity returns. And the real need for a modernization of the labor market, a need to improve the skills and to remove the segmentation in the labor market behind the public and private sector. This was more than 10 years ago. We're revisiting this topic now today, and we find a lot of the same kind of results. I'm going to show you, just for the sake of time, 3 important messages coming out of this research with 1 or 2 slides, and then we have a few minutes for questions, and then you go off to your game and make sure that Kuwait is as productive as possible tonight to win from Bahrain. The first message is this: sacrificing productivity for the sake of just more jobs is not sustainable, because negative productivity growth, as I showed you, will ultimately lead to a decline in income and undermine international competitiveness. And over the past 10 years, we already have been seeing some of that. Because we have created jobs and not the productivity, we're looking at a lower growth of the economy than what we could achieve. And if we continue with that, we will not be able in this region to be competitive in all sorts of non-mining sectors of the economy in going forward. Just here is a chart. It shows you the growth rate of the GCC region as a whole. The orange parts of this chart is the growth of employment, and that's good. It's good to grow jobs. But the blue part is the growth of labor productivity. And the two things added together give you the black line, which is the growth of GDP. So what you can see that has happened over the past 10 years is that, yes, we have still been adding more jobs, but the speed by which we're adding more jobs is going down. That orange part is becoming less, and the blue part is not coming back into positive territory, and as a result, the economy is going too slow. We only see this in the GCC region. Here you see the GCC on the left. On the right-hand side, you see the mature economies, you see all the emerging markets and the world together, and you see that everywhere, even in emerging markets, we're creating more jobs, but we're also creating more productivity growth. So it's very important that we go forward in doing that. Of course, not all sectors in the economy are showing low productivity growth. On the left-hand side, you see sectors like finance and transport and communication and utilities and commerce, trade, which actually have shown positive productivity growth. So it's not across the economy that we're weak. There are actually sectors we're doing well. But then there are sectors where productivity growth is negative, like in construction and in business services and in mining. And there are some sectors where there's not a lot happening, like in manufacturing and in government and in agriculture. So it's important that we're going to shift our economic activity to those sectors on the left, because that's where we have the productivity growth. That's a very important message that this research is showing. Now, of course, this is not unknown. The diversification programs, the growth plans that all economies in the region have are all trying to divert economic activity towards non-mining activity. But the question that we've been asking ourselves is does that diversification also lead to faster productivity growth? Has it taken productivity growth into account? So here's the second important message. Despite a significant drop in oil and gas prices over the last 5 years or so, it seems that diversification to sectors that do not enhance productivity has intensified, has gone worse, leading to a further degradation of productivity at the aggregate level. So what we saw 10 years ago, it has only gone worse. Despite the diversification programs, we have moved even more economic activity to sectors in the economy that actually are generating low productivity growth. And there's a deep analysis in the report, which I will not have the time for to go through here tonight, that is looking at a lot of these effects. We have been looking at how much productivity growth is there within each industry, and how much is aggregate productivity growth supported by moving activities to sectors with higher productivity growth. And the bottom line is, it's only become worse. We have some sectors that have positive productivity growth, but we keep moving more to construction, to real estate, to sectors where we're actually not being able to accelerate productivity growth. Which really brings me to the last message. How can diversification become smarter that we do not only diversify, but also diversify to sectors where things are more productive? So that's the last message. Smart diversification policies create the conditions for qualitative growth. They support markets in which private entities will respond to signals about which sectors to invest in and where to employ resources according to growth potential, profitability, and productivity. It's a long sentence, but just let's break it down. Qualitative growth is growth of skills, digital transformation, and productivity. It is not just expanding more jobs in low productivity industries, right? It's not just putting more investment in sectors that do not generate the research. So qualitative growth is skills, digital transformation, innovation, technology, and productivity growth. It is done in markets. Governments can help, but markets ultimately help business leaders to find the right signals. Where can I really find a return for my investment? So governments help to create the platforms for innovation, but governments do not decide where we invest. That is what markets do. That is what we've been seeing in the rest of the world. Governments play an important role, but they cannot sit on the chair of business leaders who are actually making these investments. And at the conference board, day in, day out, we find that business leaders around the world want to get these signals. They are there to be entrepreneurial, to take risk, to make investments, to sometimes fail, and as much as possible succeed. And if we do that, we will be able to employ the resources in those sectors where there's the biggest potential for growth, where they can make profits, and where there will be growing productivity. So what are the 3 key elements of smart diversification policies? Make sure you diversify to non-mining sectors with high productivity growth rates. Second, make sure that private sector development is done in a way that it is positive for productivity growth, that it provides those incentives for growth, and make sure that you invest in intangible assets that help productivity growth to grow in the longer term in going forward, that it is really a long-term commitment. Market forces are critical to this, and privatization helps to drive competition. There is a role for the public sector, for sure. There's a role for the public sector to make sure that we have right competition policies, that we provide the right level of education so that we can have high quality education, that we provide innovation policies, that we have an open trade environment for free trade, that we can liberalize the capital account so that foreign direct investment and technology comes in. But the role for the private sector is to innovate and to digitize, to invest in people, and to create a workforce for the future. Can it be done? Yes, it can be done. If you look forward at our projections for the next 5 years, we will sure continue to invest in the economy, but we may be able to at least reduce that negative green part and make it less negative, or perhaps even more positive in going forward. So the focus on qualitative sources of growth is something that will help the economy to grow further. I sincerely hope that this report is going to contribute to the attempts in this region to make the growth plans and the diversification policies productivity enhancing, because that is the way to make growth in the medium term sustained and to come back to these higher growth rates that we have enjoyed for such a long time, but be able to continue them in the longer term. Thank you very much.
اخواني اخواتي الحضور، نفتح باب الاسئله. اذا في اي احد عنده استفسار تفضل، ونقدر ناخذ الاسئله بالعربي ونترجمها. تفضل.
My question is, what's the standards you have used to measure the productivity?
There are multiple ways to measure productivity. So one measure that is most widely used is labor productivity, which is just looking at the growth in production over the growth in the number of workers or the total number of hours worked. But we also used a much more sophisticated measure of productivity, which is called total factor productivity. So the green bit that you saw there is called total factor productivity. It doesn't only take account of labor, but it also takes account of investment in machinery, equipment, and structures. And that's very important because a lot of the growth in the region, as you could see, was driven by investment. And investment is good. It actually needs to be done in order to create productivity. But if you over-invest relative to the skills and relative to the digital transformation that is taking place, then it will lead to this slower productivity growth. And that's really what we have been seeing over the last 10 years or so.
Thank you.
تفضل.
Who owns productivity?
Can you say that again?
Who owns productivity? Who's responsible for it?
That is a very good question. It's really something we own together as a society, because my main point is, as a society, we want to create a good standard of living for our people. And a good standard of living starts by giving people a job, but also giving them a job that gives them a reward, gives them a wage they can live on in the longer term. And what happens if you create jobs without productivity is that at some point we cannot afford to pay sufficient money for those jobs, right? I mean, if you cannot make your productivity on your job, you have to pay people less in order to still be able to run your business. Companies are primarily the ones who create products and services and provide them to the people. So that's why we put so much emphasis on it's the private sector that makes investments, because they pick up the market signals, they provide the jobs to people. Can governments help? Absolutely. Should governments help? Certainly, because there's so many things that governments can do to help businesses build the resources, build those qualitative growth sources. So governments invest in education. Governments invest in platforms of innovation and infrastructure so that companies can operate, that roads work, that there's broadband capacity. So all those things are really important. What governments usually are not very good at is then deciding which sectors in the economy should grow and which sectors the company should invest in order to make that growth happen. That's why we have entrepreneurs. That's why we have business people. They take risks. Sometimes they lose. Quite often they win. And if they lose, they go out of business. And if they win, they can grow their business. So governments need to get out of the way once they have provided conditions for growth. So we all own productivity. But companies will ultimately have to drive the result. Governments need to make sure that the right conditions are there.
I just want to add, would like to add just a little point here. Knowing, being from Kuwait and the numbers here show the aggregate, right? The total output over the number of labor, that gives you the labor productivity. And if you put the total output over, let's say, the factors of production, that gives you the total factor productivity. And the numbers are showing it's very low. I think knowing what we know about the Kuwaiti economy, for example, and maybe it's true also in other Gulf countries. One, there is a significant over-employment in the public sector of the Kuwaitis, right? So that drops drops the productivity. And then this is among the Kuwaiti labor. And among the expatriates in Kuwait, then if you have a high level or a high portion of the very low skilled, then their productivity is low. So when you add the two effects together, then there you end up with this low productivity. And then fixing it is not, you really have to go back to the reasons, you know. For example, for the Kuwaitis, if you want to see why the government is hiring all the Kuwaitis, this is becoming, it's not because they need them for the job, it's becoming, or it has been, and it stays for the foreseeable future as a wealth distribution. It's part of the wealth distribution system to employ Kuwaitis, not because he's productive or because he has that much output to give, and this is the reward for that, where it happens in free economies. So, but I think what's happening in Kuwait is happening also in the rest of there is significant expatriate labor. We are in what the Kuwaiti labor force is maybe, 25% of the total labor force in Kuwait, maybe less even. Yeah, it's less. Yeah.
That's less.
So I'm just trying the numbers is showing is the aggregate, but then you really need to go under the hood and see exactly how, if you want to move. I mean, this is very alarming, the figure that is being mentioned tonight. Due to poor productivity, our growth from 5% drops to 0.5%, to minus 0.5%. This is, I mean, really a killer here.
Yeah. Dr. Ahmed, تفضل.
You mentioned during presentation and put very strong place on the market signal. And I think you're assuming that in Kuwait there is a market clearance, as the case in most developed countries. But if you study the Kuwait economy, there are many points of oligopoly. Have you tested for oligopoly before, assuming that the diversification would be oriented to the right sectors during the market mechanism? This is big question. This is question number one. Question number two, the figures you have presented on the growth rate, you have neglected the population rate of growth, which is around 2.6. If we subtract them, we will have negative all the way through, all the rate of growth you have presented in real terms. The last point regarding, you have mentioned that some leading sectors which have been attached to lead the diversification does not do the job because of misallocation of resources to this. That means the spillover and dissemination effect of these sectors are not working. What is the reason? Thank you.
Well, those are big questions, and they're very good questions. I think on the market signals, I want to be clear. I'm not sitting here as a hardcore market believer and say only markets are solving all the problems. Markets are imperfect by definition. We do not have, not in the United States, virtually no country in the world, markets that are perfect. Markets are where, you know, the demand and supply come together and prices determine and returns determine where companies invest. But there are some places where markets work better than in other places. And one of the roles that governments have is to make sure that the signals get improved so that we can match demand and supply better. It's not perfect anywhere, but an important role for government is to make sure that market signals begin to work better. I didn't say that free markets are solving all the problems. They don't. Free markets do not exist. There are lots of imperfections, and we need to have governments to help us improve markets. What I do not believe is the alternative, which is that we should kill markets because they don't work, and therefore governments should take all the decisions. And in some cases, and I'm not just referring to the region here, but more generally, we have seen that that direction is happening a lot, even in European countries where markets work reasonably okay. We see that innovation policies quite often become very much government-driven. The government is picking the right sectors. It's deciding where the winners should be, and that's where I think that the history is showing us that that is not necessarily going to be the case. That really brings the other two questions that if I understand your question on population right, is that the population growth in the region is only making things worse. You know, if you have declining growth rates with a rising population growth, per capita income will decline. There's a little bit of good news in the projections, and that is that population growth will gradually slow down a little bit in the region. But you're absolutely right. There is the need to absorb labor into the labor market is important. But again, if you do it at the cost of productivity, it's not sustainable, because you basically create jobs for people who can't make any money, and that is only making things worse down the road. And finally, on sectors that are doing well or not, so the sectors that I showed you, trade or spillovers, they only do well if they continue to make investments in renewal and continue to make investments in innovation. And, you know, they may have done it in the past, but if they don't continue to do it in the future, they will not be successful. So you're raising very legitimate questions that productive diversification is not easy. I didn't say that. The only thing that I would want to plea for is to make sure that productivity becomes part of the growth agenda and becomes part of the diversification policies. That would help a lot.
دكتور عباس تفضل.
Thank you, Professor Mark, for very interesting information that you have supplied. And thanks to the Economic Society for their great performance, actually, in bringing such great speakers all the time. Looking at the productivity, especially at the labor aspects, labor productivity, it's a very complex issue. Now, looking at one specific number, probably sometimes it's misleading. What's behind the number is more important, actually. And now looking that we need to change the education programs in order to enhance productivity. Actually, things is working the opposite in Kuwait and other GCC countries, that the lack of now connection between wage or incentives in general and the productivity in the public sector mainly, which is huge in most of the GCC countries, is reversing impacts on the education and making the education worse and worse year after another, because people feel that at the end you will be evaluated with whether you are productive or unproductive at the same level in a government sector. And most of the citizens are looking for a job in the business sector, in the government sector, not in the business sector or not in the private sector. And that's how can we now reinvent put the wheel again on the right direction and having the impact of the education positively on the productivity.
So I much appreciate you make this comment, because the comment you're making is very important, not just for the region, but for the world. Education is not solving everything. And leaving education just to the schools and the universities is not going to do it. It's important. It's important as a starting point that kids need to read and write and do their maths and all those kind of things. But what then needs to happen is that people need to be attracted to sectors where they can have a rewarding job. And that's what government, and that's what companies do. Companies should provide these people with additional training, with skills. We need to have kids, when they are in school, give them an opportunity to work in businesses so that they can learn about what it is to work in business rather than in government. And they will find that in business you can learn about new technologies and innovation, and things are moving fast and are more interesting. So one thing is paying people more, and that's hard in this part of the world where we have high public sector wages, and for the private sector to catch up is difficult, particularly if productivity growth is low. But people can also get satisfaction from the fact that they work in an environment where they can learn a lot. We find data in the United States, for example, we do a lot of research there, where we find that employee engagement, so the fact that people are enjoying their job, is actually driving productivity growth. It's positively related, and it really helps. So there is a very important role for the private sector to not just rely on the government for providing people with the skills. You need to open your doors as a company for people who are in training and give them and try to teach them, and let them understand what a really good job is about. So education and training is really a joint responsibility for government and business. So it's really a very important call on the business community, and it's quite right.
But I see that the major role should be for the government to play here, you know, like good government institutions and legal setting can probably play a very great role in this respect. Thank you.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. First of all, I would like to thank Kuwait Economic Society for preparing and giving us good guest speakers and good lectures throughout the year. My question is about the main subject matter of the subject matter of this lecture is based on one important element, which is data. And my question is, what is the sources of data that you rely on in building these indicators, and what is the quality of this data, especially in countries like, I know that in the advanced and advanced economies, the sources of data is available to everybody, and it is there that can you analyze. But in countries that are less developed, and the quality of data and relying and building these indicators. Thank you.
Yes, great question again. Thank you for that. The conference board is more than 100 years old, 103. I wasn't there at that time. When we started, we had no good data in the United States. In fact, the business leaders who started the conference board said we need to do this because we need to work with the government to create better statistics. So one of the first things we did in 1916, we didn't have a consumer price index. We didn't have a cost of living index. So the business sector couldn't measure how to pay workers because we didn't even know what their cost of living was. So the conference board started that work and then started to collaborate with the government and build a cost of living index, which ultimately became the inflation number, the CPI, that is being used in the United States. Today in the United States, we're blessed with a lot of data. They're not perfect. There's a lot of debate in the United States about the measurement of digital technology and what it means for the prices of digital goods and services and how that plays into productivity. So we have huge debates in the United States about the perfectness or imperfectness of data. You're right that if you go to other countries, it's worse. There are even more problems. But we cannot develop good policies on the basis of no data or bad data. So the commitment that we're trying to make in all the research we do at the conference board, and we hope to make a contribution here, is to actually help to begin to improve the data, to see where is the weakness in the data, what are we not measuring right, and where should we prioritize things. So we very much engaged with the statistical community and really try to work with them on improving short-term indicators, getting measures of consumer confidence, develop these leading economic indicators and see which leading economic indicators give us the best signals, but also to think about the longer term measures, such as how do we measure the digital technology and how do we interpret that in the measurement of production statistics. So I think the theme of tonight is nothing is perfect, and that is certainly true for the data also. Nothing is perfect, but we can definitely make it better if we do the work, and that's the contribution we're hoping to make.
For some of the indicators, actually, we collect the data. We have field work, for example, for the C-suite challenge report and also for the consumer confidence index. These are conference board generated data because they are based on surveys that we generate. But I agree with you. I mean, we take sources from the IMF, from the World Bank, from the TCP itself. The conference board itself has a significant database, global database. But data imperfection is a problem even in developed economies and more so here in the Gulf. Yeah.
Please.
Hi. You mentioned in your talk that manufacturing jobs would be the kind of jobs you'd like to see come to Kuwait. Yeah. And I'm wondering, across the entire world, aren't manufacturing jobs at risk from automation? And secondly, in a country like Kuwait, I know your job is not to affect policy, but what might that look like?
Yeah, very good question. Again, all good questions tonight. It's true that automation itself is changing jobs, and there are jobs that disappear because of automation. There's been a lot of debate also again in the United States and in Europe about the fact that digital transformation might actually reduce the number of jobs in the economy. It reminds very much of debates we had earlier when the car came on the road. People said this will cost us jobs because now the horse riders will not have a job anymore. And that's true. After a while, we don't have that many horse riders anymore, but we got a lot of drivers on trucks and things like that. And the same thing happened in all the new technology that we got over time. New technologies create innovation, and innovation creates new jobs. And that innovation actually requires jobs that are needed in order to drive innovation. So for example, in digital transformation, we know that it's not that it is killing jobs. It does, some jobs disappear, but there are a lot of jobs that are needed in order to make digital transformation happen. We need people with better software skills, for example. A big problem in many countries, including in Europe, is that a lot of kids, going back to education, coming out of schools, know how to play games, but they don't have the skills to program. And those skills are necessary in order to drive digital technology to the next stage. So competencies are changing. Some skills that are needed are actually soft skills. People who know how to collaborate and therefore be creative and be able to build new products and services. So it's a very subtle story. Jobs are changing. Some old jobs will disappear, but new jobs come up. On the second point of view question, where can Kuwait be? We are in a world of increasingly integrated global supply chains. So where in the past country A was producing product X and country B was producing Y and they were trading with each other, today that world looks different. Country A is producing part of the product, country B is producing another part, country C is producing another part on the basis of their strongest competencies. So here's Kuwait and all the countries in the world, the middle of the world, literally in the middle of the world between Asia and Europe and the US, perhaps even on the Silk Road, who knows? And has a relatively highly educated and wealthy population, has this drive towards moving away from relying on fossil fuels only to an economy that is more broad. So the country has enormous opportunities to do this. So where in the manufacturing sector the country exactly needs to develop, I don't know. That's why we need business leaders and entrepreneurs. They will find the opportunity for the country to open up to those investors from the rest of the world and to integrate and to participate in this global value chain. Global supply chains is really important. So I think there's a critical role for manufacturing and for services around that manufacturing, transport and logistics, trade, commerce, and those kind of services.
أي سؤال بعد حد عنده سؤال؟
I didn't keep you away from the football game. I didn't do it. I was done at 5 to 8.
عندك سؤال؟ في سؤال؟ تفضل دكتور. Yes.
Bart and Dr. Mahdi Jassam, whom do you think gonna win today, Kuwait or Bahrain?
I couldn't hear the last part of the question.
Who gonna win today the game, Kuwait or Bahrain?
Oh, who will win today? As I said, tomorrow we're going to Bahrain to talk to our Bahraini friends, so we're not making a choice here.
Bart, come on, Bart.
We will the game. We will win anyway.
You could do much better.
يعطيكم العافية. تفضل ناصر.
Two separate topics. Dr. Mahdi mentioned that the employee in the Kuwait government are feeling that it's part of distributing the wealth. Well, unfortunately, in the constitutions, mentioned very clearly in the Kuwait constitution that the country had to give a job for its own citizens. But unfortunately, the private sector is not doing their job of creating these jobs because the country, the government, is the major stakeholder for the jobs. And the question for you, Mr. Bart, is do you think Kuwait had real economy?
Do you think we can be what?
Do you think in Kuwait we have real economy?
We have a real economy.
Real economy, like real economy. Do you think we have real economy? Because when you diversify like the role of private sector and the role of public sector, well, do you think that the people in the private sector investing in innovation and other stuff, unfortunately, the private sector is moving around like a moon around the public sector. And the public sector probably is not doing their job very well.
Right.
Well, that's my...
Look, I'm certainly not as an outsider, but also as an economist, I really believe that you never should put the blame on just one sector in the economy. Usually it's a complex matter of things. It's true that economies that are very dependent on natural resources, which is has been the fortune for the region, but also now a little bit the burden for the region about how do we get out of this environment where we are so dependent on one source of growth. And it doesn't only happen in this part of the world. There are other examples of that where countries are very dependent on commodities, whether it's in Latin America or in Sub-Saharan Africa. So it really puts a challenge for a society to make sure that we benefit from the fortunes that we're blessed with, but at the same time also make sure that we set them aside for longer-term sustainable growth. I think Norway, I'm European myself, I think Norway is a great example, has struggled with this, and it's hard, but at some point I found a way, a consensus in society, to set aside resources and reinvest them in long-term economic development. And that does require commitment from everybody, and it requires a political economic system that I cannot make for any country to happen, but I do think it's a very important part of the story to think about the political economic environment in which we make these changes.
تفضل فعليك أكيد ناطرك أنا ترفع يدك.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. في البداية أحب أشكر الجمعية الاقتصادية الكويتية وكونفرنس بورد، وأيضا بالتنسيق مع مركز الكويت للسياسات العامة، يخلينا صراحة سعيدين بأن تكون هذه المشاركة في هذه المحاضرة لثلاث جهات احنا نكن لها جميع الاحترام والتقدير. Mr. Bart, I always enjoy speaking to you, and we had a lot of fun discussing many issues. I went through lightly on the report. I found very interesting the smart diversification concept you are introducing. Yes, we have our own challenges. It's at the end of the day, there is a lot of political economy issues that been influencing our productivity in general. However, in 2013 to 2018, as you mentioned in your presentation, they are also correlated with a high flow of low-skilled labor to the market in the country. Mm-hmm. We registered, due to the infrastructure and mega projects and contracts being signed between 2013 and 2018, a flood of a low-skilled laborer to the country. Mm-hmm. Currently, based on the June 30th, 2019 numbers, we have almost 90% of the labor force in this country with expat, with low education level, that causing even the productivity to push even lower. We are expecting this correlation to last for some time until 2024, before we start to see some room for productivity by improving what we call the knowledge capital of the country. Our learning poverty index, it's a new index right now, shows that it's 50%, meaning when it comes to reading comprehension, out of 2 we have 1, cannot even comprehend what is being read. The number of people actually right now in the labor force exceeded 500,000, almost, with very minimal skill of reading and writing skill in their own mother language. So that's pushing the productivity even lower. As of these citizens, because most of them actually, I don't say working in the public sector, but they are living in the public sector. We are using public employment from a political economy perspective is to accommodate all of these issues. So there is no wonder, and I see your productivity figures based on the numbers you have, it's very generous, and thank you for them. But it's much worse given some of the real number coming out recently. I have to admit the private sector until now is playing the role of depending on the government and everything, and blaming the government about everything. I do understand the private sector should take much stronger and louder role in order to move forward with innovation. However, from the public sector side, the government side, we seem to be very much comfortable with this situation until we get this fiscal pressure due to the oil prices fluctuation. So thank you very much for your report. The introduction of the idea of a smart diversification seemed to be very well said. And we are right now trying to move on the digital transformation agenda. However, we still have some issues, even with the private sector enabling. Just to give you an example, our public authority for the civil information, they came up with a very interesting infrastructure project by building up a blockchain infrastructure. The question was, who in the private sector is ready to have application to use and utilize this blockchain? The answer was no, nothing. Meaning, we need to push, while we are building the infrastructure for blockchain per se, we need to also create not just awareness, but building more, put pressure on the private sector to move toward more of a digital transformation. Again, I thank you, I thank Conference Board, I thank the Kuwait Economic Society and Kuwait Public Policy Center, my dear Muhannad, my dear Dr. Mahdi, they did super job to accommodate Kuwait Public Policy Center in the last minute. Thank you very much.
It's our job, yeah. Thank you very much. تفضل.
I think, Professor, you mentioned a very important point, which I think none of us, or most of us in Kuwait are not clear about, which is creating a consensus about what's the direction we need to go. Dr. Khalid Mahdi is working on a certain direction, other institutions are working, and the other organizations within the civil society are working in different with different understandings. Our colleague here spoke about the responsibility of the private sector or the responsibility of the public sector, but there has never been a discussion or a consensus on, okay, what is the issue or challenge that we have in Kuwait? You know, is it job creation? Is it wealth distribution? Is it productivity improvement? What's the challenge, so that all resources and focus goes on it, and then we can allocate blame if we want, or say who's responsible. But till we have a consensus, as you said, in other countries where they faced issues, then we can agree on it. The second thing is, Dr. Mahdi spoke about blockchain, and I believe private sector responds to incentives. The reason no one wants to invest right now in blockchain, because there is no incentive. It doesn't save money, it doesn't increase sales, it doesn't do the things that someone wants to invest in to get a return. So it's not simply just adopting a technology for the sake of technology, but adopting a technology, as you said, for the return on investment of that technology, as opposed simply to say on your website, we adopted blockchain technology or we adopted XY technology and so on. So I think the issue of incentives is extremely important, that the role of government to help in that area.
Thank you for that. I'm not particularly proud of coming from the United States and say that there's a consensus there. It isn't. But having the debate and really trying to drive to what is the purpose of an economy, is provide living standards that people can really rely on for the longer term, is a really good starting point of any debate to have. But I wish you good luck with that. Thank you for your kind comments. I much appreciate it.
I'd like to just make a comment on the national debate in terms of priorities. Having been in the World Bank for more than 5 years, and I have seen countries across the world, and we hope we don't want to be in a situation fiscally, financially, where somebody else is going to set the agenda for you and is going to set your priorities, because that's what some of these World Bank, IMF, etc., that's what they do to Bolivia's and to the countries like that of the world. They set the Washington agenda, 15 points, subsidies, privatization, liberalization, blah, 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 blah. And each one of these is a killer. I mean, look, when you remove subsidies only from the gasoline, next day is riots and people are, fighting in the streets. And we are still good. We have our, the income is good, but we should think ahead. We cannot have these deficits year after year after year, and knowing your economy is performing so poorly. Something has to happen, and you ask a very good question. Who's going to set the agenda? Is it the government? Is it the parliament? We hope debates like this, really, and that's in the core of the our memorandum of understanding with the Kuwait Economic Society, is to promote debate and to increase public awareness about the status of the economy. And when we put out the indicators, then the dashboard is clear to everybody, and they can see where is it overheating, where things are okay, where things are not okay, and how they should move forward. But I am optimistic personally. Now we're having a new prime minister who's about to form a cabinet. We're opening a new page. I really hope this new page is totally different from our path in the past. Thank you.
Just want to close, before closing the session, thank you for our distinguished guest. And Mr. Part, thank you for having you here in Economic Society, and hope to having you again very soon. And it's always our pleasure. دكتور مهدي شكرا، ونتمنى لكم التوفيق إن شاء الله، وإحنا دائما الخدمة. أبو يوسف شكرا على حضورك، وشكرا على تواصلك ويانا أول بأول، وشكرا لكم جميعا إخواني الحضور، ونتمنى نكون إحنا يعني كانت أمسية خفيفة عليكم اليوم. يعطيكم العافية. شكرا.